Number 8 LSU, number 14 Texas A&M. Texas A&M a 2.5 point favorite for this one. The over under I have is two A&M sacks. That's it.
Okay.
LSU's allowed 2 sacks all year, in case you haven't heard. Both in the South Carolina game. According to PFF, 0 by LSU's starting offensive linemen. I didn't go down the rabbit hole of digging which reserve allowed those sacks, or if they just chalk those sacks up to team sacks, or how PFF graded that. But you get it. LSU's offensive line confirmed good. As LSU's SID Michael Bonnet pointed out, 7 of the last 8 games in which LSU has played has not allowed a single sack. That'll play. That's good. A&M averaging 2.4 sacks per game, which decent number, probably doesn't tell the full story. Faced 3 mobile quarterbacks in SEC play, and the one who wasn't, Graham Mertz, only attempted 15 passes, got rid of the ball quickly for a Florida offense that was only on the field for 22 minutes. And meanwhile, with this LSU offensive line, I would actually argue that only having 2 sacks allowed is even more impressive when you consider the quality of opponent. It's remarkable to think about this LSU offense having that stat in its favor when they have faced the likes of South Carolina, Ole Miss, and Arkansas. Those defensive lines, they all have guys who could be first-round picks in next year's draft, and it would not necessarily surprise me. 2 of those games were on the road as well, and yet Will Campbell, Emory Jones, those guys continue to lead that group, keep Garrett Nussmeier upright. That matchup feels like everything in this one. It really does. If LSU neutralizes Nick Scorton, Shamar Stewart, Shamar Turner, that's huge, obviously. I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think Turner on the interior, he's going to be the one that really has to get going, and he's got to be the one that's got to move the pile, because if we see Garrett Nussmeier kind of backpedaling in those spots like we saw at different times during that Ole Miss game, when you saw actually J.J. Pegues and Walter Nolan doing some things on the interior because that's what they do, they just weren't able to get home. I think that's the version of Garrett Nussmeier you need to see to beat this LSU team. And they still impacted those throws, I think, when they did that. And can A&M, even if it's not getting home, do that? But I just like, and maybe this will be, regrettable words, famous last words, but I just like what LSU is turning into on both sides of the ball. I do.
Yeah, it's super interesting, right? Because, this was an offensive line. And again, guys, I've been really down the middle on LSU. I thought LSU deserved the Joe Moore Award last year. I think they had the best offensive line in college football. And the offensive line foundationally has not changed a ton. There have been like a couple of changes here and there, but the guys that are starting on LSU's offensive line, have been around forever. At this point, the 2 tackles have been starting for 3 years. They're just getting better. The thing that's so interesting is I'm not exactly going to say this group is better than last year's. Like I said, Miles Frazier, we've seen. Chester's a little bit new, right? But it's the fact that Garrett Nussmeier is better at evading sacks, I think, than JD, because JD was also a runner. So like JD would kind of run sideways and try to make a play with his legs. Whereas so it's kind of like one of those if then theoreticals I always talk about, right? Your favorite thing where I'm like, hey, okay, is this line better than last year's? I don't exactly think so, because to your point, with Shamar Turner, I think the interior is a little bit softer. The tackles are obviously the same and better. So why then, with a less mobile quarterback, are they so much better at giving up sacks? When you start to factor in that the run game is not as great and that scheme, you start to see, well, how can we isolate this? And the answer is that Nussmeier not only gets the ball out fast, but he has like a very weird, I never say stuff like sneaky mobility, but in the same way that we would see these veteran quarterbacks like late career, like Tom Brady, where he wasn't that mobile, but he could just take 2 steps to the right.
Pocket mobility. Yeah, good footwork. It goes a long way.
Yeah, like Breeze was the king of this, where he would take take his drop, and then he would take 2 steps forward, and the DNs would crash into each other behind him, and he would have the cleanest pocket ever because he would get him stuck on that old, point that he was at. So yeah, I'm so fascinated by this offensive line because Will Campbell, I mean, you could make an argument too, right? I was actually just talking about this with Peyton, where Will Campbell is not super technically sound at this point in his career. He still has a lot of just like that dog in him, and a lot of that comes from starting for as long as he did, not really just like being able to sit down and work on his craft outside of the lights. And that's good and bad, right? But I think he actually has a lot of growth to do as a pro. And you could almost make the same thing about Nussmeier, where it's like the picks he's throwing aren't really because he's under pressure. They're just kind of like he's bored, and it's like Kyron Lacey down there somewhere. And like you see, like the way he threw against Ole Miss is like, what are you doing here, dude? Same thing against the South Carolina one. It's like those are the easiest types of picks to fix, because it's not like, you're freaking out, you're under pressure. It's like, no, this dude just thinks he can throw the ball to a point, a million miles away. So yeah, I think for sure it's in the pass game, but I think in the run game and with that interior, I think you're definitely right. Like LSU, they've finally decided that Caden Durham is good, which is awesome. He had 3 touchdowns, 100 yards, first time a freshman has done that for LSU since 1995. So that maybe itself, having a running back that can kind of overcome some of those weird schemes they do. But I think the run game is going to be the key, because the pass game, I think, is pretty sound as far as the O-line goes.
Well, you brought up the Ewing theory, the Bill Simmons Ewing theory, to describe how this defense has sort of taken off since the Harold Perkins injury.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to sound bad, and I'm not intending for it to be bad, but I do find myself wondering if Blake Baker sort of had this exhale the first time he sat down to come up with a game plan and realized I don't have to spend this time figuring out if I'm using Harold Perkins in the best possible way. Obviously, of course, you would still rather have Harold Perkins on your defense than not, okay? Not saying that. But I guarantee that there's an element of Blake Baker with what he's done where he feels like this is now coming together, and maybe it's just simpler. And for LSU, that's important, because you brought it up the other day. You've got guys at each level that are playing at an all SEC type level at this point of the season, with Weeks, with Swinson, and obviously as long as Zay Alexander's healthy, that's so important. I think Zay Alexander in a game like this is especially important, because do I think that Blake Baker's blitz packages will be reminiscent of what Al Golden and Marcus Freeman tried to do in that season opener? Yeah, like, wouldn't be surprising. Wouldn't be surprising if they try to throw a variety of looks at Connor Wigman and say, what can you handle? Where are you going with your reads? Because at certain points of that Notre Dame game, Connor Wigman was so out of sorts that he just was kind of blindly throwing in the direction of a ball hawk like Xavier Watts, which that's not part of the game plan to try and attack one of the best defensive backs in all of college football. LSU finally has a guy where if you just sort of blindly do that, he's going to make you pay. That's what Zay Alexander can be for this group. If Connor Wigman says, if I see the blitz, I'm going Noah Thomas, I'm not thinking twice about it. Great game to see the growth of Connor Wigman with that in mind, and with what LSU figures to present with the style of this Blake Baker defense. You want to be a big-time prospect and get that national attention where people can actually pronounce your name correctly instead of calling you Connor Wegman for an entire broadcast. You want people to correctly say Connor Wigman. Go make a name for yourself. Go do it in a game like this with huge, huge implications. Trivia question for you, Will. Who was the last LSU quarterback to win a game at Kyle Field?
Oh, man, don't tell me that, because I know it's not Jaden Daniels. I mean, it's our boy. Max Johnson.
It is not Max Johnson.
Really? Who is it?
Danny Etling. 2016.
Oh, because that one was at home that I'm thinking of. You're
back
so right.
And forth. Back and forth.
Yep.
That's what this game has become. And it's a little bit, it's Kentucky, Mississippi State. Home team's going to win. Home team just continues to win this game year after year. So will that continue? You know, it's interesting that year that happened was 2016. That was also the last time that A&M started off 4-0 in SEC play. Not pretending that a collapse like that this time around is coming, because I think A&M is doing a lot of things that Mike Elko hoped they would do in year one. But I am predicting an LSU victory on Saturday night, even though I do, if we're going off vibes, the late decision, the midweek decision to go with the black uniforms for A&M, like that. I'm not saying that's worth a full 1.5. It's worth something. It's worth the vibe, and the vibe at Kyle Field will be off the charts. I'm going with LSU to win this one, 27-24 game-winning field goal. Visiting team wins.
Love that. I'm very superstitious with kickers. I'm
a little stitious.
Yeah, like that's what. Have you ever seen my joke? I don't know if you've watched a game with me where it's come down to a kick, but every time there is a college kick. I don't know what started. I think it was the Florida kick that was missed. One of the ones in like 2020, where I will just start talking about how probable it is that the kick goes in. It's like one little quirk of watching football with me, where I'm like, this is so easy. Like statistically, he's only missed one of these. That was like the one thing we didn't even get into was those 2 weird kicks that Josh Heupel went for in that game, because it didn't end up mattering. That guy just kind of like sunk his kicker in the middle of the Bama game. But anyway, so yeah, like that. I never want to talk about kicking, but I will say what's so interesting too, and you hit on this, is like, the Brian Kelly coaching tree, right? It comes down to these two teams, which are inexplicably undefeated. We talk about schedules, guys.
In conference play,
playing. Yeah, undefeated in conference play. You're right, and of course with the losses being a weird Lincoln Riley game and DeMarcus Freeman, and it's kind of fitting, right, that we're talking about the offensive line versus the defense, two things that Brian Kelly has been known for, and I think that what's interesting is that Blake Baker is outside of Brian Kelly's defensive coaching tree. Like if you look at what Freeman runs, you look at what Elko likes to run. Blake Baker is a little bit different from those guys, and I think that goes to show that Blake Baker was him being like, you know what, guys, I'm going to go hire Corey Raymond. I'm going to go hire Blake Baker. You guys are right. I don't actually – Matt House was my guy, or he's our third or fourth choice. At least we had the courage to say that, unlike Kane Womack. But at the end of the day, we was like, we ended up with this guy. I tried it my way. It didn't work. A little bit of adapt or die there. So I think we already saw, like I said, the Notre Dame A&M version of this game, where you've seen two kind of like early career coaches under that coaching tree going at each other. Now we're going to see a version of almost like the Kirby Saban thing, without the titles, obviously, where it's like, okay, well, you're running kind of a new version of your own thing because you ran your thing for long enough that you're kind of tired of that. You're doing something, whereas I'm running your thing. I'm running the defense that you love. And granted, like Brian Kelly is an offensive coach. People forget that. That's actually his background, because he's often had great defenses and very dumb looking offenses at Notre Dame. Like
just hasn't had if you don't have a bunch of NFL quarterbacks, it's very easy to forget you're an offensive minded head coach. And by the way, I love that in this comp, Brian Kelly is Nick Saban.
Well, yeah, because he's the one who's coaching college football. And now that Nick Saban retired, he's been in the game a while. And when your offensive coaching tree is our boy, who is it, Bama, that I accidentally called Pete, and now I think that's his name.
Pete Golding, are you talking about? Or are you
no, the offensive coordinator at Alabama.
Nick Sheridan?
No. That was there for
Tommy Rees, Bill O'Brien.
That was Tommy Rees. Like, so when
Brian Dable. No, I'm kidding.
That guy. Anyway, so yeah, like Tommy Rees is kind of your offensive coaching tree. There's the guy at I think Miami, Ohio too, who's just kind of hanging out there. It's a Brian Kelly guy. But point being, like you see, like Robert Saleh, Brian Kelly defensive assistant. So point being, like this is another one of those proof of concept games. And like I said, the thing that's going to be interesting is that Brian Kelly is running a pretty unique defense from what he's had the rest of his career. That being said, I know I said I would pick LSU, or I'd pick A&M at a neutral site, but that Arkansas game really did show me something, as did I think A&M not being as dominant in their last game. I think that if we get the version of Connor Wigman that played against Mizzou, turn on the lights, it might be pretty rough for LSU. But I think that the pass rush and the defense that LSU has right now, and what they showed against Arkansas and Ole Miss when their offense wasn't great against Ole Miss, and it kind of like, it's weird that the offense is the question. So I say all of that rambling answer to say I'm right in line with you. I think we're going to go, let's call it 28-21 LSU, because I don't like kickers. But that's it. I think it's going to be a really close game, and I think that's even disrespectful. Let's say it's about a 3-point win for LSU in the 20s. 0
field goals attempted. Those are only touchdowns and extra points afterwards. Every team goes for it on 4th down, or it's a pooch punt. Yes, no kicks whatsoever.
Art school football math right there, buddy. Sevens.
Yeah, exactly. This game is a great reminder. Maybe not reminder, because I think a lot of people were skeptical of how this was going to go. But I think it's the beauty of the divisionless SEC. Mm-hmm. I think seeing these two teams, who are, again, the last two teams in the SEC without a conference loss, seeing these two teams play on this stage and realizing what's at stake and what the winner can obtain is why this is different than how it was before. Think about how many years in which it felt like the SEC championship was decided in early November, Halloween weekend, or the weekend after, with Florida and Georgia playing in Jacksonville, or Alabama and LSU playing. Alabama and LSU, the winner of that game, went to Atlanta 14 of the last 17 years. All right.
And I would argue it's decided a lot earlier than that most years, because Georgia has been smacking that division for a long time, and Alabama has as well, right? I mean, how many of the Western Division champs are not Alabama, period? So we would know, talk about like in 2016, 17, like we would know about a month into the season, well, Alabama is smoking everybody, and like it would take some wild stuff happening.
We, going into this weekend, have 7 teams in the SEC that have 1 or fewer conference losses. So that's like almost half the conference. What people who said, well, these games won't mean anything, dismissed, was how significant these conference title races now become, because we're going to get all of these conference games in November that have really significant implications for being able to get to Atlanta and having that path without knowing, well, will it come down to this tiebreaker? Will it come down to this tiebreaker? Did we have this head-to-head matchup with this team? You just don't even know at this stage of the game. So
And
You
in the
could.
offseason, you were doing the Charlie in the mailroom conspiracy theory stuff, and it's played out right in
The
front of our
tiebreakers.
eyes.
It's
You
going to
were
come down to the
so right
tiebreaker,
about
Will.
that.
It's
Because
going
look at
to.
this. I mean, look
Yes.
at this. Like, the one-loss teams, right? Like, Mizzou is among them. Guess who is not? University of Alabama. How could we have foreseen this?
Vandy.
You know what I'm saying?
Vandy is
Vandy
a
is
one-loss
among them.
team.
You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? So, like, at the end of the day, it's like they have lost to Georgia State. They're not Georgia yet. And so, point being, we are in this weird scenario where it's like, wow, head-to-head is, like, going to be pretty hard to ascertain because we have two undefeated teams that of the big wins, quote unquote, is Mizzou and Ole Miss, and that's it in the SEC.
And you don't have these paths that are going to be blocked in the typical way. And there's just a lot more chaos that can happen. And so you've got fan bases. You're like, all right, should I be rooting for this team or this team? This team has a path. And but wait, if they're there with one loss, then we would have the advantage over them. There's just a lot more of that. And this is the first time that we talked about when we did the tiebreaker episode in the offseason. We tried to do the SEC's job for itself. Came up a little bit short in that. But nonetheless, this is the first time in which we have an SEC championship without divisions. And so deciding it this way, I think we will see this intrigue, and it kind of begins with this game. And then moving forward, look at all these matchups in November that are going to have significant SEC championship implications that we otherwise wouldn't have had in a division formula. So here for all of that. Should be an awesome, awesome game. I was talking with my guys on the next round. Biggest game at Kyle Field since the Manziel Bama 2.0, 2013. I think that is very much very much the billing for this one. So great showcase game for Mike Elko in your